Hey guys, tonight we're rolling up our sleeves and stepping into the rather sticky, grimy world of medieval cuisine. You'll want to brace yourself because this isn't a story of grand banquets and royal roasts. This is about what most people ate, and spoiler, it was often awful. Picture a pantry full of muddy, root vegetables, stale bread, and meat that may or may not be a tempting escape. You're about to discover how breakfast might be 3 days of thin gruel lunch, a hunk of cheese with a side of suspicion, and dinner. Well, if you're lucky, more gruel. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, post your location and what time it is for you. I love seeing where you all are from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle into your kitchen, except it's not a kitchen. It's a soot-dark corner of a one-room hut, barely shielded from the wind. There's a clay jar of barley, a pile of wrinkled turnips, and half a loaf of something you suspect was once bread. A rat watches you with mild interest. Welcome to your medieval pantry home to more cobwebs than cuisine. Even the idea of fresh food is something of a fantasy. Vegetables are pulled from the earth and slapped straight onto your plate, dirt and all. Turnips are the backbone of your culinary life. Why? Because they grow in terrible soil and don't die easily. If you're lucky, there might be onions, but they're often so pungent they could knock out a goat. Bread is a staple, of course, but let's talk about that bread. Made from rye or barley, it's coarse, heavy, and goes stale faster than a medieval love poem. If you're poor, which you probably are, the bread's been stretched with ground-up beans, peas, or worse, sawdust. Historians still argue whether some of these filler ingredients actually caused mild hallucinations or just the sense that dinner was judging you. As for protein, don't expect steak night. There's cheese if the cow is producing, eggs if the chickens aren't broody, meat rare. When it does appear, it's a celebration or a mistake. Often, it's already a bit off. Medieval folks had a high tolerance for aged flavors translation. If it smells like a foot, it's probably ready. One cheerful little historical tidbit: sometimes food was stored under floorboards. That's right, the place where mice and beetles throw nightly raves. And when you dig out that precious wedge of cheese, it's a gamble. Will it be edible, or will it try to fight back? Even the nobles weren't safe. Sure, their pantries had more variety, but preservation methods were limited and spices were eye-wateringly expensive. So unless you were at the king's table, your noble cousin's pantry might still smell faintly of fish and desperation. All this scarcity bred creativity, or depending on your viewpoint, desperation disguised as culinary bravery. Cold porridge. Add honey, if you have it. Boiled cabbage again. Maybe mash it this time. The phrase "don't play with your food" didn't exist yet, but it probably should have. That said, nothing went to waste, ever. Soup bones were reboiled until they produced only faint memories of meat. Bread crusts were soaked and repurposed. Even spoiled milk had a role to play, curdled, dried, or fed to pigs who would then hopefully feed you. So, as you survey your turnips and contemplate your rock-hard loaf, just know this: you're not alone. Generations survived on these sorry staples, chewing their way through history. one bland mouthful at a time. You wake up hungry. Not surprising considering last night's dinner was a lukewarm bowl of cabbage water with a side of boiled sadness. The sun hasn't fully risen, and already your stomach is protesting. Time to break your fast with what exactly gruel. Again, you ladle the thin barley porridge into a cracked wooden bowl. There's no sugar, no fruit, no cinnamon swirl. Just grains water and hope. You eat slowly because that's all there is, and you need it to last until sundown. In medieval Europe, breakfast wasn't so much a meal as it was damage control. For peasants like you, the daily menu rarely changes. If you live near a forest, maybe you scavenge mushrooms. Careful though, mistakes can be fatal, and your local healer still thinks leeches are an acceptable solution for poisoning. You chew with suspicion. Midday brings lunch, which is often a copy-paste version of breakfast. Bread and cheese if you've got them. Maybe a bit of dried fish if it hasn't gone too chewy. Historians still argue whether these meals provided enough nutrients to sustain the relentless labor of peasant life, or whether people were just perpetually exhausted and pretending not to notice. Dinner is the main event, but temper your expectations. It's cooked in the same smoky corner where everything you own is stored, including the bucket you bathe in. Tonight's menu: pottage, a thick stew made from whatever's lying around. Barley leaks leftover gruel herbs from the hedgerow and the occasional shard of last week's sausage. You toss it all into an iron pot and simmer it over the fire, stirring with a spoon that's been used for everything, including removing soot. The flavor profile, earthy. And by earthy we mean it might actually contain soil. Medieval cooks didn't peel vegetables. They didn't waste food. And who needs hygiene when you've got hunger? Interestingly, pottage was often kept going for days. Leftovers from yesterday's stew became today's base. Add water, maybe a fresh turnip, and presto, culinary continuity. Some families had stews that practically became generational. And here's a cheerful note: meat wasn't off the menu, just rare. Chickens were too valuable, alive pigs, too expensive to raise unless you shared. When meat did appear, it was used like a spice, shaved into pottage or grilled into oblivion to kill off whatever bacteria had RSVP'd. Even milk had its moment, until it didn't. Raw and unpasteurized, it spoiled fast. You drank it early, or turned it into cheese or butter if you had the tools. Spoiled milk. That became sour curds, or was boiled into oblivion. The idea of throwing it out didn't exist. You ate around the problem. Despite the drudgery, there were moments of joy. Seasonal fruits brought brief sweetness, apples and autumn berries in summer. And wild honey, if you were brave enough to raid a hive, could transform even the humblest barley gruel into something almost festive. Still, most of the time, you eat because you must. Not for pleasure, not for Instagram. Just to keep the plow moving and the children from crying. You're standing by the fire, staring at a lump of something vaguely meat-shaped, wondering whether it's edible or a medieval mystery in progress. Food spoilage isn't just common, it's practically a food group. You either preserve what you've got or prepare to go hungry. The preservation methods: salt it, smoke it, dry it, or gamble. Let's start with salting. Imagine an entire side of pork buried under layers of coarse salt in a wooden barrel. It's not glamorous, but it works. Salt draws out moisture, and moisture breeds rot. Easy math. Except salt is expensive. For peasants, it's rationed, reused, and treated like treasure. For nobles, it's a status symbol. Your salt cellar literally tells people where you rank at the dinner table. Smoking is the next big thing. You hang meats over a smoky hearth for days. It flavors them, yes, but more importantly, it extends their shelf life. Sort of. Historians still argue whether this method actually made food safer or just masked the taste of things going south. Either way, you eat what you've got, smoke-stained or not. Then there's drying. Think of it as the medieval version of air frying minus the convenience and TikTok recipes. Fruits, mushrooms, fish all could be laid out under the sun or near the fire to dry. The trick: keeping animals, bugs, and small children away while they shrivel into chewy resilience. If all else fails, you ferment. Cabbage becomes sauerkraut. Milk becomes sour cheese. Nothing is wasted. Everything is transformed. Sometimes deliciously, sometimes not. The line between fermented and rotten is thin, and you're expected to know the difference by smell alone. And yes, people absolutely got sick. Food poisoning wasn't an occasional mishap. It was a seasonal hazard. That questionable stew from last week's feast might send you sprinting to the chamber pot, which is really just a bucket, by the way. Preservation wasn't just about technique, it was survival chess. In winter, you relied on what you'd managed to save from summer. If your stores ran low, you thinned your gruel, gnawed dried roots, and hoped the neighbors had worse luck than you. Nobles had the advantage of larders and stewards to manage their food stock, but even they had to deal with the realities of preservation. Meat might be buried in snow, packed in barrels, or kept alive until the last minute. That's right, sometimes the best way to keep food fresh was to make sure it was still breathing. And fish. Let's talk about dried cod. It was everywhere. Tough as leather and smelling like low tide, it was boiled to a limp, flaky thing that still somehow made it into stews, pies, and religious fasting menus. No one liked it, but everyone ate it. Even baked goods had tricks. Bread could be par-baked, then rewarmed later, or turned into rusks, hard biscuits that could last for weeks, perfect for travel and teeth testing alike. You, meanwhile, are deciding whether to slice into that smoked ham from 2 months ago. It's stiff, dry, and slightly green at the edges. You scrape off the questionable bits, give it a sniff, and toss it into the pottage. If it boils long enough, it's probably fine. Probably. You lift the lid off tonight's stew, inhale deeply, and sigh. It's bland. Again. The turnips have done their best, but the flavor is elusive. You reach for your spice pouch and pause. Because of course, you don't have one. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where the concept of seasoning is largely aspirational. Spices existed, sure, but unless you were rich enough to wear velvet or sleep on a feather bed, they were distant dreams. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg. They were all imported luxuries, worth more than gold in some cases. A sprinkle of black pepper could cost a day's wages. Most peasants never saw them, let alone tasted them. Instead, you make do with herbs. Not the fragrant, carefully cultivated kind from a sunny Mediterranean garden. We're talking hedgerow greens, wild garlic yarrow, and something your neighbor swears is good for the digestion, though it smells like regret. You crush them by hand and toss them in. Better than nothing. Interestingly, some nobles went overboard. When they did get spices, they flaunted them. Entire feasts would reek of saffron and cumin, not because the chef thought it paired well with fish, but because the host wanted to shout, "Look how rich I am," using only his soup. This led to some truly bizarre dishes. Meat pies laced with sugar and cinnamon. Boiled eels dusted with ginger. Sweet and savory had no clear boundary in medieval cuisine, much to the horror of modern palates. Historians still argue whether medieval folks genuinely liked this taste mashup, or whether it was a side effect of trying to mask the taste of old meat. For those lower on the food chain, flavor came from smoke salt and hope. Charred onions added bitterness. Sour whey could give soup a little zip. And if you had a lemon, well, you probably stole it. Some areas used mustard seeds, which could be ground into a sharp paste. Mustard didn't require foreign merchants or Silk Road caravans, just patience and a sturdy mortar. It became the ketchup of the Middle Ages, slathered on everything from cold pork to questionable bread. Speaking of questionable garum, an ancient fish sauce that lingered into the medieval period in some regions. It was made by fermenting fish guts in the sun. Yes, really. And yes, it was popular. You might wrinkle your nose, but imagine adding it to your cabbage stew. Suddenly, it has depth, or at least distraction. Dairy also played its part in flavoring the unflavored. Butter, when available, could make even barley porridge bearable. But again, it depended on the cow, the season, and your social status. Many peasants relied more on buttermilk or curdled whey, less creamy, more acquired taste. In rare moments of glory, you might stumble across honey. Thick golden and so valuable it was guarded like treasure. A spoonful stirred into your gruel. That's luxury. That's a birthday. You settle in for dinner with your bowl of under-seasoned, slightly burnt stew. It's warm at least, and filling. As you chew, you imagine far-off lands where people sprinkle cinnamon like it's nothing. Here, you crush bitter herbs between your fingers and pretend. You sit down on a splintery stool, eyeing your steaming bowl of pottage, while over the hill, trumpets announce the evening feast at the manor house. You can't see it, but you can imagine it: roast birds, buttery breads, golden goblets, and no turnips. You sigh and poke at your stew. Let's get one thing straight. The divide between peasant and noble diets was vast. You're eating cabbage. Lord Fernald is dining on peacock. Literally. The bird is roasted, then its skin is sewn back on feathers, and all for dramatic flair. Historians still argue whether it was actually eaten or just displayed like a feathery trophy. At the noble table, meat reigns supreme. Venison, boar, rabbit, and fowl, often caught from private forests, you're legally banned from entering. The dishes are spiced lavishly. There's saffron in the rice cloves in the pie, and pepper in everything. Why? Because nobles want to show off. If your nose isn't tingling and your lips aren't buzzing, is it even dinner? Their meals arrive in courses. First, a display of cold meat pies decorated like works of art. Then, warm roasts, skewers, soups so thick they double as paste. Bread that's white fluffy and entirely free from bark flour. The desserts: spiced pears, almond pastries, and maybe a sugar sculpture of a jousting knight. You meanwhile wonder if your root cellar has any carrots left. Interestingly, Nobles didn't eat off plates like you might think. They used trenchers, thick slabs of stale bread that absorbed juices and acted as edible dishware. After the meal, these were given to servants or the poor, assuming they weren't too soggy. It wasn't all delicious excess, though. Sometimes the show outweighed the flavor. Dishes were dyed with crushed flowers or gold leaf. One recipe calls for stuffing a chicken inside a duck, then a goose, and finally into a pig. It's less a meal and more a poultry nesting doll. Chefs competed to impress, even if it meant inventing things no one really wanted to eat. The servants, of course, didn't dine like the lords. They got the leftovers, chewed bones, spooned out trenchers, cooled scraps. Still, it beat pottage. And if you were clever or quick, you could sneak a taste of the real deal before it was hauled away. The sheer volume of food was staggering. Some feasts lasted for hours, even days. One account describes a celebration with over 200 dishes, many of them repeated in slightly different forms. Roasted quail with pepper, then quail in broth, then quail tart. It was indulgent, yes, but also about reputation. The more waste, the more wealth. You chew your barley, slowly staring into the fire. No jesters, no sugar swans, no goblets of spiced wine. Just the creak of the door, the snore of the dog, and the earthy taste of survival. Maybe tomorrow you'll trap a rabbit, maybe not. But tonight, Lord Fernald is gnawing on gilded goose while you stir your stew with a carved stick. And somehow, both of you go to bed with full bellies just full of very different things. You're heading to market today, a rare treat and a risky one. The village square comes alive at dawn with a blend of smells, none of them good. You're greeted by the warm, ripe scent of animal dung, the tang of sour ale, and the fishmonger's offerings, which seem to have been dead longer than they should. Welcome to the medieval grocery run. First, you check your purse. 2 coins, some crumbs, and a pebble you thought was a dried pea. It'll have to do. Markets in medieval times weren't daily affairs. They happened weekly, sometimes less, and required you to travel on foot by cart, or balancing a basket on your head. The experience chaotic, loud, and deeply fragrant. Vendors shout about their wares. Fresh eels, one cries, holding a wriggling net. Only slightly sour cheese, calls another. There's no refrigeration, so freshness is relative. You learn to judge by smell and gut instinct. Historians still argue whether people had stronger stomachs back then or simply suffered more in silence. The stalls are filled with whatever's seasonal: apples in autumn, garlic in spring, turnips year-round because, of course. Spices are locked away behind the counters, measured out by the pinch and priced like gold. You pass by those enviously. You need staples. You buy barley from a sack that smells faintly of mildew. The merchant throws in an extra scoop more from pity than profit. Then some onions wrinkled small but potent. You skip the meat stall, too pricey, and that rabbit looks more like someone's pet than a dinner. A woman near the well sells eggs each cradled in straw. They're fragile and costly, but you haven't tasted one in weeks. You splurge, wrapping it carefully in your shawl. You'll boil it slowly over embers and savor it like cake. The market is also a place for news. Gossip flies faster than carts. The miller's apprentice caught stealing a nobleman's feast, gone rancid whispers of a new bread tax. The latter concerns you most. You already can't afford white bread, and now the brown may get pricier. Speaking of bread, you queue at the baker's stall. The loaves are dense dark and heavy enough to double as doorstops. They're made with barley rye and occasionally peas or lentils to stretch the flour. The crusts are so hard they've chipped teeth, but they last, and that's what matters. Sometimes quality is enforced, believe it or not. There are laws against selling underweight bread or watering down ale. Inspectors roam measuring loaves and testing scales. Still plenty slip through. That pure honey you bought last month. Mostly tree sap and optimism. You weave through the crowd, passing a man selling dried herbs, some medicinal, some questionable. A few charlatans pitch miracle powders that look suspiciously like dirt. It's a marketplace, yes, but also a carnival, a clinic, and a courtroom, depending on the hour. By midday, your feet ache and your basket's half full. You head home with barley onions, a half-stale loaf, and that precious egg. It's not much, but it's more than yesterday. And as the market fades behind you, the smell of spoiled fish clings to your clothes. You smile anyway. In a world of gruel and boiled roots, today was a good day. You eye the water bucket in the corner and hesitate. It's clearish, sort of. You dip a cup and sniff, and decide again to drink ale instead. Because in the Middle Ages, drinking water is a gamble, a bad one. Welcome to the era where hydration could be hazardous. Streams look pretty enough babbling through the fields, but they're also the village sewer. Laundry is washed upstream, animals drink midstream, and someone definitely dumped waste downstream. All you need is one wrong sip, and you're clutching your stomach for the next 3 days. Historians still argue whether medieval folks knew water was making them sick, or just assumed the saints were mad again. So instead, you drink ale. Weak, barely fermented ale, often called small beer. It's not the kind of brew that gets you dancing on tables. It's more like damp bread in liquid form. But it's boiled during brewing, which kills off most of the nasties. For peasants, it's safer filling and mildly nutritious. Even children drink it. Monasteries perfect the art of brewing. Monks with their time and tools create cleaner, more consistent ales. Nobles build lavish cellars to store their barrels. You hope your neighbor didn't skimp on the hops this time. Wine exists too, but mostly in warmer climates or higher circles. In England or Scandinavia, it's rare and expensive. Imported wine is prized aged badly, and often so sour it's cut with spices or honey. It's less vintage and more vinegar surprise. In cities, water is sometimes piped from cleaner sources through wooden or lead channels. Yes, lead, which explains a lot. The system works until it doesn't blocked, broken, or tapped by enterprising thieves. You might buy a bucket from a water carrier who swears it's fresh from the spring, but you trust him about as far as you can throw your chamber pot. Speaking of which, waste management isn't a thing. Streets double as latrines. Rain washes filth into wells. Animals relieve themselves freely. You begin to understand why ale was the beverage of choice. It's not just about taste, it's about survival. Some households keep barrels of rainwater, but even that gets murky. Covered with moss, bits of leaf, and the occasional drowned insect. Boiling helps if you have the firewood. Otherwise, you pray and drink with your eyes closed. Herbal teas exist, mint chamomile nettle, but they're usually reserved for the sick or those with a garden. And milk risky. It spoils, fast curdles faster, and often ends up in cheese or butter before it ever hits a cup. So every morning, you start your day with ale. So does your neighbor. So do your kids. It's not a party, it's just breakfast. You sip slowly, savoring the malt and the mild bitterness. It's warm, flat, and slightly sour. But you're not doubled over in pain, and that's what counts. By the time the sun sets, you've had 3, maybe 4 cups. Enough to stay hydrated, barely enough to buzz. You refill your wooden mug, raise it toward the fire, and silently toast the miracle that is not dying of dysentery today. The manor hall glows with candlelight, and you're lucky or unlucky enough to have been summoned. Tonight, you're helping serve at a noble's feast. It's not just dinner, it's theater. The guests arrive draped in furs and jewels. The floor is strewn with herbs to mask the smell of feet, and a small dog is already chewing on someone's slipper beneath the table. You carry a platter to the long table, dodging elbows, and a juggler who's very bad at his job. The room is chaos wrapped in ceremony. There are no forks, just knives, spoons, and fingers. Napkins are for the elite. Everyone else wipes hands on bread, which will later be handed out to the poor or tossed to the dogs. And there are dogs. Lots of them. The first course arrives, roasted swan redressed in its feathers, its beak dipped in gold. Guests gasp. Someone claps. A jester drops his hat into the stew. Dinner has begun. Unlike your quiet stew at the hearth, noble meals are noisy. People talk, laugh, burp, yes, burp, without shame. Children bang spoons, musicians play, and servants hustle like a choreographed army. It's overwhelming. Also, weirdly sticky. Your job: keep the trenchers full, refill goblets, and try not to get trampled by the falconer who's brought a bird as a centerpiece. You pass a plate of eel pie to a woman who looks like she smells of cloves and judgment. She doesn't thank you. Let's talk about the menu. You'll see meat, lots of it, but also audited teas. Aspic meat jelly custards, spiced with cinnamon, and a bizarre almond milk stew. One dish is shaped like a castle. Another is a peacock, painted with saffron, and staring at you beak agape. Historians still argue whether anyone enjoyed these dishes or simply clapped to avoid offending the host. The entertainment continues. A singer performs a poem about a cheese that seduced a knight. A dog steals a loaf and sparks a chase. You refill the wine cups and marvel at how tipsy the nobles get on claret before dessert. As the meal progresses, the servants get to sneak scraps. Not the swan, of course. That's for the high table, but the trencher's half-eaten pies and ends of roast meats. It's a feast compared to your usual fare, and you take it gratefully, ducking behind a pillar to chew in peace. Despite the opulence, it's not exactly clean. Bones are tossed under tables. Grease drips onto tapestries. The hall smells of meat candle wax and unwashed linen. The dogs are now full and sleepy. The juggler is bleeding slightly. You're exhausted. Still, the spectacle is impressive. You've seen dishes you didn't know existed, tasted foods you couldn't name, and watched a knight sword fight a roast goose for applause. The medieval dinner theater is wild, strange, and oddly mesmerizing. Eventually, the feast ends. The nobles stagger off full and happy. You help clean sweeping bones, stacking plates, and trying not to slip on tripe. You pocket a crust of fine white bread for tomorrow and head home, ears ringing with laughter and lute music. And as you return to your quiet hovel with its smoky hearth and oniony stew pot, you can't help but feel a little richer for the moment. The fields are brown, the sky is gray. You wake to the sound of nothing. No clinking pots, no bustling kitchen, not even the rooster's usual crow. That's how you know famine season has arrived. And this year, it's early. Crops failed last month. Too much rain, not enough sun. Or maybe a frost that lingered, biting down just as the wheat was flowering. Whatever the cause, the result is the same empty granaries, gaunt livestock, and grumbling bellies. Your village has entered survival mode. Meals shrink. Pottage stretches thinner. The turnip, once your bland best friend, is now a luxury. You scrape lichen off rocks, dig up wild roots, and watch as neighbors boil nettles into a green mush that barely qualifies as food. You remember last year's lean times, how your neighbor ground acorns into bitter flour, how a family baked loaves using sawdust to stretch the grain. Historians still argue whether such substitutions caused more harm than hunger, but desperate people don't debate recipes. Children grow quiet. That's the scariest part. When even their whining stops, you know their little bodies are conserving energy. You give them the crust of your bread, even if it means going to bed hollow. Hunger isn't just a lack of food. It's a cloud that settles over everything. Sometimes, villagers turn to the church. The priest organizes a fast, ironic, but hopeful. Maybe divine mercy will follow. Maybe not. You light a candle and mutter a prayer between stomach growls. The nobility fare better, of course. Their larders were stocked months ago. If they suffer, it's an inconvenience, not starvation. Still, even their gardens are bare. Prices rise. Theft increases. A chicken stolen from a yard becomes a hanging offense. You watch your neighbors with wary eyes. There's talk of eating horse meat. It's taboo, but times are hard. Someone whispers about dog. Another about a baby buried quietly. You pretend not to hear. Salted meat becomes currency. A single dried fish can trade for a cloak. Butter is liquid gold. You hide your food in holes beneath floorboards, behind loose stones. Even family is not always trustworthy when the hunger sets in. And then the worst hits: the bread runs out. With no flour, the village millstone grows cold. The baker shutters his shop. Rats grow bold. You catch one, skin it, boil it, cry a little. The meat is stringy and tastes of guilt. Still, somehow you endure. You learn which weeds are safe. You chew leather, softened in broth. You sleep more to feel less. And when the first green shoots appear in spring, you weep not from joy, but from sheer relief. Because famine isn't just about food. It's about patience, about pain, about proving day after empty day that you want to keep waking up. You wake one morning to find the town crier shouting something about bread. Again. You shuffle out of your cottage half-dressed and catch the tail end, and any baker found shorting loaves shall be flogged and find, ah, yes, food laws. The medieval version of quality control, enforced with a mix of paranoia and public spectacle. Bread, being the cornerstone of your diet, is serious business. And the authorities? They're watching closely, very closely. In towns, there are officials called assize inspectors. Their job is to ensure that bakers don't cheat customers by shrinking loaves or using inferior ingredients. The rules are clear. If you bake a 1-pound loaf, it must weigh a pound or else. To play it safe, many bakers throw in a little extra dough, creating what's known as a baker's dozen. One extra loaf, just in case. Bread wasn't just regulated, it was obsessed over. Entire sets of laws, called the assize of bread and ale, dictated who could sell what, for how much, and with what ingredients. If prices of grain rose, bread size dropped accordingly, but the weight was always measured. And heaven help the baker caught cutting costs with chalk, clay, or sawdust. Historians still argue whether these laws were about protecting public health or preserving public order. After all, nothing sparks a riot like rising bread prices. Starving crowds have a way of turning pitchforks toward the nearest bakery. But it wasn't just bread. Other foodstuffs came under scrutiny. In some towns, there were ale tasters, actual men whose job was to sample local beer for quality. Imagine a burly guy barging into your tavern, demanding a pint for inspection, then burping his approval before waddling out. Even pies weren't safe. There were reports of meat pies filled with questionable contents, old cat's rats, or worse. In London, pie vendors were inspected, and those found guilty of using filthy or stinking meat were publicly humiliated. Some were locked in the stocks with their pies beside them. Markets enforced their own rules. Vendors caught shortchanging customers using false weights. Hollow loaves or diluted wine were fined or banned. In extreme cases, they were paraded through the streets, products in hand, as walking cautionary tales. Then there were food bans tied to religious observance. Meat on Fridays forbidden. Fasting days sprinkled the calendar like breadcrumbs, more than 100 per year. That's a lot of fish. It created an odd economy where eels were in higher demand than beef, and where dried cod became the medieval equivalent of tofu, bland, obligatory, and absolutely everywhere. And it wasn't all sour. Occasionally, the laws offered protection. In some places, grain was stockpiled during good harvests and sold back during poor ones at regulated prices. Monasteries often served as emergency pantries, distributing alms and bread to those in need. You, meanwhile, glance at your own hunk of bread. It's heavy, coarse, and definitely regulation size. Still warm, thanks to the baker, who knows better than to mess with the guild inspectors. You bite in, grateful for its density, and slightly amused that even in this brutal world, someone is measuring bread with scientific zeal. Because when food is scarce, the rules that govern it are sacred, and breaking them, that's not just a sin, it's a civic catastrophe. The bell rings 3 times low and solemn. You pull your robe tighter pad silently across cold stone and take your place at the long wooden table. No one speaks. This is the monastery, and here meals are quiet, very quiet. Monks live by the rule of Saint Benedict, which means prayer labor and modest meals served in silence. Today's lunch: lentil stew, black bread, and a pear. You've had worse. The dining hall is high-ceilinged and drafty. Banners hang overhead, but the real centerpiece is the reader, a designated monk, who stands at a lectern and reads scripture aloud, while the rest of you chew in reverent stillness. Every slurp, crunch, or cough echoes like a thunderclap. The food itself is plain by design. Monks aren't here to indulge. They avoid meat from four-legged animals, an old rule meant to promote purity. Fish is allowed, as are eggs and dairy on occasion. And yet somehow, Brother Matthew always ends up with the biggest portion. Historians still argue whether kitchen monks had favorites or if it's just your imagination. Each monk receives a measured portion served from giant cauldrons that have likely never been cleaned thoroughly. The bread is coarse and brown, made from whole grain and served with reverence. If there's a smear of honey or a pat of butter, it's a feast day or someone's trying to curry divine favor. Watered-down wine accompanies the meal, modest but safer than water. You sip slowly, eyes down, listening as today's reader drones on about the trials of Job. You try to chew exactly 63 times as instructed, but lose count around 37, and just hope the heavens aren't keeping tally. Meals happen twice a day, once around mid-morning, again at twilight. No snacking in between. Fasting days trim the schedule even further, cutting meals down to one or skipping them altogether. It's a diet plan shaped by devotion, not digestion. Yet despite the austerity, monastic kitchens are surprisingly advanced. Monasteries have access to their own farmland, dairies, herb gardens, and fish ponds. They cultivate leeks beans and garlic. They breed carp and raise bees. The food may be plain, but it's homegrown and consistent. And the monks, they're experts in cheese making. Some of the finest medieval cheeses came from abbeys, and many recipes survive today. Monks also brewed beer stronger than your average ale and used it to support their monasteries. Imagine that divine dairy and holy hops served in moderation, of course. Still, mistakes happen. One infamous anecdote tells of a novice who accidentally salted the pudding instead of the soup. The result was legendary and reportedly sparked 3 separate lectures on attentiveness. The meal ends with a final bell. You rise, bow slightly, and file out in silence. Dishes are cleaned by designated monks, usually the ones with penance to fulfill. The smell of garlic lingers, mingling with incense and beeswax from the chapel. You walk through the cloister, stomach full, but not heavy. Your mind is clear, and your body feels light. For all its rigid rules, the monastic meal offers a kind of peace. No noise, no show, no feasting frenzy. Just quiet bites in candlelight taken with purpose. And for once, you're not dreaming of turnips. You duck into the kitchen, coughing almost immediately. Smoke hangs in the air like a cloud of burnt bread and regret. The medieval kitchen is not a cheerful place. It's hot, dim, and vaguely threatening. A fire roars in the hearth, and above it, something is bubbling ominously in a blackened cauldron. The first thing you notice is how dark it is. No windows, no chimney, just a hole in the ceiling to let out smoke, and even that seems to have gone on strike. Your eyes water. Your clothes absorb the scent of singed onion and damp ash. Welcome to cooking by candlelight. There's no proper oven. Baking happens in a clay dome heated by fire, then scraped out before the dough is slapped inside. Timing is everything. Too soon, and the bread burns. Too late, and it stays raw. You've seen both, often in the same loaf. The hearth is your main appliance multitasking as oven stove and accidental incinerator. Pots hang over the flames by chains balanced precariously so they don't tip. They often tip. Scalded feet are common as are singed eyebrows. Historians still argue whether medieval kitchens were death traps or just misunderstood. You try to stir the stew without leaning in too far. Last week, the cook leaned too close and singed her fringe. She now wears a scarf and glares at the pot like it insulted her lineage. Wood is precious. You ration it carefully, prioritizing meals over warmth. Some villages even use dried animal dung as fuel. It burns hot fast and smells exactly how you think it would. And yet it's better than freezing while waiting for your cabbage to boil. Lighting is worse. A few rush lights flicker in the corners, thin reeds dipped in animal fat. They sputter and spit, casting shaky shadows that make it hard to tell if your stew is browning or just boiling angrily. You drop a potato. You don't pick it up. You share the space with chickens' dogs, and once a particularly bold goat. Cleanliness is a dream. Counters are rough wood or stone slabs, never scrubbed, always stained. The cutting knife doubles as a poker. Your apron is more patch than cloth. Despite the chaos, cooking is sacred. Meals must be ready at dawn and dusk. You rise before light to prepare breakfast. A thin gruel, maybe some fried leeks if you're lucky. You knead bread by candlelight, muscles aching while the others still sleep. For the rich kitchen life is grander, but just as frantic. Castle kitchens are vast with multiple hearths, dozens of servants, and a kitchen master barking orders like a general. Still, fires burn down unexpectedly, and pigs escape their spits. Even nobility can't avoid the odd kitchen fire or scandalous pie collapse. One curious tradition: fire insurance spells. People etch protective runes into hearthstones or hang charms from the rafters to ward off disaster. It's more superstition than safety. But when your entire food supply is one cauldron away from catastrophe, you'll try anything. You finish the stew, barely burned, and call the others. They trickle in bowls in hand, ready to eat whatever survived the fire and your mood. The smoke makes the meal taste vaguely of wood chips, but no one complains. And as the flames flicker low and the last spoon scrapes the pot, you sigh. Another meal survived. Another day fed. You're invited to a feast, well, not really invited, more like conscripted to serve again. But tonight promises a twist. Word is the chef has prepared a surprise. You raise an eyebrow. In the medieval kitchen, surprise usually means something that still twitches. The dish arrives under a veil of steam. You peek inside. It looks like roast pig, but also somehow fish. There's citrus involved. Maybe welcome to the medieval art of culinary deception. Medieval cooks loved to play tricks. With limited ingredients and few ways to impress, they turned to theatrics. Food wasn't just for eating, it was for show shock, and sometimes a mild panic. This is the age of illusion foods. Take mock eggs, for instance, made from almond milk curds, shaped into little yolks colored with saffron and served in shells. no chickens involved, or meat fruit, minced pork, molded and dyed to look like apples. Historians still argue whether these dishes were meant to amuse or simply confuse. Then there's the pièce de résistance, the cockatrice, a chimera of chicken and pig sewn together roasted whole and presented like it crawled out of a night's fever dream. It's terrifying and delicious. Probably. Some dishes weren't even meant to be edible. Sugar sculptures, elaborate pastry, castles, pies that released live birds when cut open. Yes, just like the nursery rhyme. You standing there with your ladle and a growing sense of dread are expected to serve it with a straight face. The deception wasn't just visual, it extended to flavor. Vinegar masqueraded as wine. Almond paste stood in for cheese. Spices were used to mimic exotic tastes. You once tasted a lobster made from dyed beans and eel skin. You've never fully recovered. Nobles loved it. The weirder, the better. It showed wealth imagination and the ability to waste ingredients with flair. And the guests, they gasped, clapped, and occasionally gagged. That was part of the fun. For common folk, such extravagance was pure legend. But occasionally, a village cook might try a trick boiling beets to dye bread, red-shaping dough into animals, or sneaking honey into porridge and pretending it was from a noble's kitchen. You remember one market day when a vendor sold cherry pies made entirely from mashed turnips and beet juice. They were alarming, but cheap. You bought 3. Not all tricks were harmless. Some were designed to cover up spoilage. Spices masked rot. Vinegar neutralized stink. Bread soaked in broth disguised its staleness. You once bit into a mutton pie that was definitely pigeon and possibly regrets. Tonight's feast features a fish pie that turns out to be minced rabbit. The guests cheer. You wince. The chef beams, then unveils dessert, a hedgehog-shaped pudding spiked with almond slivers and glazed in rosewater. It looks more menacing than appetizing. You steal a taste. It's fine. Odd, but fine. And for a moment you get it. The fun, the art, the strange satisfaction of eating something you didn't expect. Even if it's pretending to be something else entirely. As the feast winds down, you snag a slice of pear tart that's actually made from squash. You eat it slowly, smiling at the sheer absurdity. In a world of hardship, hunger, and gruel, a little trickery on the tongue can feel like magic. You wake to the sound of shouting again. Another skirmish on the edge of the village. Another call to arms. Another season where war chews up what little food there was. In peacetime, eating was a chore. In wartime, it's a battlefield of its own. Armies have arrived. Not yours. Not really anyone's. They're just here, and with them come requisitions. That's a polite word for we're taking your grain, your chickens, and possibly your pants. Soldiers need food, and they're not known for their manners. You hide your bread, you bury your dried beans, but they find them anyway. They always do. In times of war, the food supply collapses like a flan in a furnace. Fields go untended, mills are seized, and livestock mysteriously vanish into cookpots you never see again. Suddenly, famine seems like a fond memory. At least it didn't involve pointy spears. For soldiers, meals are bleak. They eat what they can carry: hardtack, dried meat, maybe a bit of cheese if it's not too green. Everything is salty, tough, and aggressively beige. One joke among the troops: If it bends, it's bread. If it breaks, it's meat. Historians still argue whether armies starved more from poor logistics or strategic oversight. Either way, no one's feasting. Unless you count gnawing on bark to keep your jaw moving. In sieges, things get worse. Cities are cut off. Supplies dwindle. You boil leather. You eat rats. You eye pigeons with increasingly culinary intentions. A classic siege survival recipe. Pigeon pie with bootlace crust, garnished with despair. Sometimes, nobles send for food wagons of salted pork barrels of beans, but they rarely reach the front lines intact. Looters strike, wheels break, grain spills, and the lucky ones eat soup made from boiled nettles and wishful thinking. You recall a story from an old soldier. A garrison once resorted to boiling books for soup. Parchment, he claimed, tastes like onion skin, probably better with pepper. In your village, you do what you must. You pick wild herbs, trap mice, and hope the soldiers don't return too soon. You stretch every scrap. You barter beg, and when you must steal. That's the real wartime menu, whatever you can find before someone else does. Even the nobility struggle. Their kitchens may be stocked, but supply lines falter, and the illusion of plenty begins to crack. You hear of nobles dining on dog of royal bakers, weeping over moldy rye. War makes everyone equal in misery, if nothing else. Tonight, you boil barley in a pot that once held stew. The barley is old, the water muddy, and you stir it with a spoon that's been sharpened into a knife. You eat slowly because there's no more. Not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow. And as the sky darkens with smoke and ash, you press your back against the wall and try to ignore the distant thunder of hooves. Dinner is done. The war is not. The bells ring out across the village. Not for war, not for famine, but for something far rarer, a feast day. Today, you eat not just survive. And as the sun climbs over the rooftops, the whole town hums with cautious excitement. Feast days are tethered to the church calendar, holy days of obligation, saints' celebrations, harvest festivals. They're planned, predictable, and most importantly, full of food. Everyone pitches in. Even the poorest offer what they can. Turnips, onions, barley, eggs. The manor contributes meat, the monastery wine, and the baker works through the night. You're on kitchen duty, but you don't mind. There's joy in this labor. Fires burn hot. Cauldrons bubble with something richer than usual. The smell of roasting meat fills the air. Not just one kind either. Chickens, maybe a pig, possibly even venison. If the Lord is generous or boastful. Children chase each other through the square. Musicians tune lutes. Someone's already dancing with a flagon in hand. You can't remember the last time laughter outpaced hunger. By midday, the tables are set. Long boards laid across barrels covered in linen, if you're lucky, sackcloth if you're not. People crowd around with bowls and smiles. There's no formality, just food and gratitude. And jokes. And second helpings. You sit down with your wooden spoon and marvel at the spread. There's pottage. Yes, but it's thick, rich with meat and herbs. There's bread, white crusty and fresh. There's even fruit. Pears, apples, a few bruised plums. Someone's uncle brought honeycomb, and the children are sticky with joy. The centerpiece. a pie the size of a wagon wheel. You don't ask what's in it, you just eat. And for once, it's delicious. Even the ale tastes sweeter. Or maybe that's just your mood. You drink deeply, laughing, as the cook tries to explain the recipe to someone who's already 3 cups in. The priest blesses the food. The old woman next to you mutters that he took too long. The young ones giggle. The dogs nap under the benches, bellies round and legs twitching in dreams. As night falls, the music picks up. There's dancing, clumsy but joyful. A boy plays a drum. A girl sings a song about cheese and love and goats. No one remembers the words. Everyone claps anyway. You lean back against a barrel full, in a way that's not just physical. The stars blink above. The fire crackles. And for once, the world feels generous. Because in this long, hungry stretch of history, the rare feast is more than a meal. It's a reminder you endure. You find joy where you can, and sometimes, miraculously, gloriously, there's enough to go around. And now as the last embers in the hearth sigh into ash, and the echo of distant laughter fades into the quiet of the night, you stretch your limbs full and tired. The long shadow of hunger retreats, at least for now, and in its place settles something softer, a memory of warmth, of sharing, of survival, seasoned with stories. Your belly is no longer empty. Neither is your heart. You think back to the turnips and the gruel, the smoky kitchens, and the sour ale, the jester's fish pie, and the goat that tried to eat your apron. Somehow, it all blends together like the best pottage, odd, familiar, and nourishing in its own peculiar way. The Middle Ages weren't glamorous, but they were rich in flavor, sometimes literally, often metaphorically. There's something gently comforting in knowing people then weren't so different from you. They worried, they worked, they laughed at bad jokes, and they found magic in a stolen apple or a perfectly chewy piece of bread. Even in scarcity, they fed each other, sometimes with food, sometimes with song, sometimes just with presence. So, as you lie back, eyes heavy, listening to the soft hum of the imagined village outside your window, let yourself drift with the rhythm of it all. The quiet scrape of spoons in bowls, the soft thud of bread on a wooden board, the flicker of candlelight in a stone kitchen, the patient hiss of stew boiling over a smoky flame. You made it through another day, so did they. Let the feast settle, let your breath slow. But before you drift off, there's one more thing. You've eaten, barely. But what about water? The bucket in the corner is bone dry. Tomorrow, before the sun's even up, you'll walk miles just to find something that doesn't make you sick. Because, in the medieval world, hunger was hard. But thirst could kill. Let's follow that journey next. You step outside into the morning haze, jug in hand, and the dust clings to your ankles like regret. The sun is barely up, but already the village feels brittle. Dry roofs, dry soil, dry mouths. You follow the path past mossy huts and lazy chickens, heading toward the well, with a hope that borders on delusion. Because food might keep you alive, but water decides how long you'll stay that way. It's 1342. The well is whispering its familiar disappointment, and you're about to begin your daily pilgrimage for something that won't poison you. You carry your clay jug down a rutted road, past thatched roof cottages and sleepy hens. Every few minutes, you wipe sweat from your brow and blink at the sun. It's not even noon, and you're already thirsty enough to drink from a hoofprint puddle. Medieval villages weren't usually built around reliable fresh water. You'd think that would be step one when founding a town, but no. Many sprang up due to feudal politics, farming patterns, or good old superstition. The bishop said, "It's a holy spot." People muttered conveniently, ignoring the brackish swamp nearby. And so, your water journey begins each morning like a slow, scratchy pilgrimage. If you're lucky, there's a communal well in the village center, built from gray stone and wrapped in iron rings. Unlucky, you walk a mile or more to a spring, possibly sacred, definitely mosquito-ridden. Historians still argue whether early medieval folk understood the concept of waterborne illness. What we do know is that many avoided certain water sources not because they carried cholera, but because they were said to be haunted by elves or tasted like goat feet. A mainstream fact to comfort you by the High Middle Ages larger towns began assigning keepers of the conduit officials responsible for maintaining public fountains or regulating access to wells, which is great unless you weren't on their good side. Sometimes you get bold and try your neighbor's rain barrel. You lower your bucket slowly to avoid waking their geese. Rainwater was safer sometimes, but it could stagnate, grow slimy, or acquire a film that shimmered like a mini oil spill. In winter, you melt snow. In drought, you hope. In all seasons, you sip cautiously and pray your guts don't rebel by sundown. You pass by a girl using a wooden ladle to scoop water from a barrel. Her dog drinks first. You envy the dog. Even washing your hands feels like a luxurious rebellion. Most people didn't waste precious water on personal hygiene. If you looked vaguely less filthy than a turnip, you were doing fine. And so as the sun slides across the sky and your jug sloshes half full, you return home. Not triumphant, just less thirsty. A quirky tidbit. In some regions, villagers believed whispering prayers into their water jugs would keep the contents from souring. Others simply tied sprigs of rosemary to the handle and hoped. You finally sit on a bench. The jug rests between your feet. The water's warm. It tastes faintly of soil and rust. But you drink it anyway. Slow, careful sips and close your eyes. The rooster crows. A goat sneezes. And for a moment, it's enough. You hoist your jug and begin the slow walk to the spring. The one just beyond the grove of elder trees, half shaded, half myth. Locals call it St. Marjorie's Eye, as if the earth itself blinked and wept to gift you this trickle of salvation. It's not marked on any map, but every grandmother in the village could lead you there blindfolded, one footstep at a time. When you arrive, you see the usual suspects. A shepherdess soaking her feet. A mason filling his wineskin. A toothless crone muttering blessings to the water as she gathers a few drops in her tin cup. This spring is sacred, or at least mildly magical. Nobody drinks without saying something, even if it's just a muttered, "Please don't kill me." Holy wells and sacred springs dot the medieval countryside like freckles on an overbaked nose. Some bubble up crystal clear, others sulk beneath mossy rocks, but all come with stories. This one healed a knight's gout, they whisper. That one cured Lady Roswin's rash, and also her fourth husband's bad temper. Mainstream history tells us that many of these springs became pilgrimage sites. People traveled miles on aching feet to dip a cloth, bathe a baby, or just splash their forehead with hope. Churches built small chapels beside the more famous ones. And someone, somewhere, always claim to have seen a vision, usually a saint, occasionally a talking bird. Fringe belief. Some thought the wells had moods, that if you approached disrespectfully, the water would turn foul or worse, disappear. Villagers occasionally tied ribbons to trees nearby, hoping to appease the well's spirit. Others left coins or bread crusts on nearby stones, small tributes for large favors. You crouch at the edge of St. Marjorie's Eye. The water trickles out of a crack in the limestone just enough to fill your jug with a little patience and a lot of mosquito bites. You remember being told never to look directly into the spring, just in case. In case of what no one says. As you fill your container, someone beside you dips a cloth and presses it to a blistered knee. They close their eyes. It helps they whisper. You don't ask how. Historians still argue whether medieval people genuinely believed these waters healed, or if they simply recognized cleaner sources when they saw one. After all, a spring bubbling through natural limestone tends to be safer than the town puddle next to the pigsty. You sit for a moment on the mossy rock, watching ripples spread across the tiny pool. A beetle skates the surface like it owns the place. Nearby, someone recites a verse in Latin, probably learned phonetically, barely understood. Doesn't matter. The ritual comforts. In one remote village, rumor goes, the local holy well once turned red for a week. People said it was blood. Science would say algae. But you're not in a scientific mood, and neither were they. Some springs have names too ancient to trace. The Weeping One, the Laughing Pool, Griselda's Cup. Names passed down like lullabies, each with its own hush. And while we're whispering, here's a small absurdity in one region of Wales. Villagers named a spring after a cow that supposedly mooed whenever the water was unsafe. No records confirm the bovine's success rate. You hoist your full jug and head back through the trees, feet crunching over acorns and leaf mold. The sun filters through green like church glass, and you swear the light is cooler here. Maybe St. Marjorie's doing. On the way home, you pass another traveler limping. They carry a small vial around their neck, filled with spring water, and maybe a little wish. They nod. You nod. There's a quiet camaraderie among the constantly thirsty. Back in the village, your shoulders ache not just from the weight of the jug, but from knowing you'll do this again tomorrow, and the next day, and every day until the sky splits open with rain, or the well miraculously refills. You glance at the younger boys loitering near the fence, already pretending not to see you. It'll be their turn next. Maybe. If their mothers can shout louder than yours. Fetching water is a full-time job. Literally. In some households, it takes up to 4 hours a day. For most peasants, this task is assigned to women and children. Because what else are you doing with your time? Plowing fields. Washing your one tunic. Too bad. The spring calls. In hilly regions, it's worse. Much worse. There are places in medieval Europe where the water source is a full kilometer downhill, and you know what that means. Sure, going there is easy enough, but returning, that's when the real pilgrimage begins. Imagine carrying 2 sloshing buckets on a yoke up a steep, muddy slope, while goats cheerfully block your path. A common solution: Put your children to work. It's not unusual to see tiny 5-year-olds staggering along with buckets half their height. One historian wryly noted that the medieval child did not suffer from excess leisure. There were other tricks. Some towns developed long relay systems where water was passed person to person in clay jars. The jars got progressively more cracked and leaky as they neared the village, but at least your shoes stayed cool. Fringe detail for your next trivia night in parts of the Balkans, water fetchers carried small charms sewn into their tunics meant to protect them from well-spirits thieves and sudden spills. The charms often included bits of rosemary iron nails, or even dried frog legs, protection fashion, and light conversation starters. And it wasn't just physical effort. Water fetching came with its own etiquette. You never ever cut in line at the spring, not unless you wanted to be glared at by every elder in the parish, and possibly cursed by 3 different widows before sundown. You once saw a scuffle break out over turn order. 2 women, both holding identical jugs, stared each other down in silence for a full minute before one hissed, "I saw you arrive second." It ended with one jug broken, one face scratched, and both families refusing to speak for a decade. Historians still argue whether this labor-intensive process led to closer community ties or just more reasons for neighbors to quietly resent each other. Likely both. By late afternoon, you're back home, arms wobbling like jelly, but triumphant. You have water. Maybe not enough for a bath. Definitely not enough for laundry, but enough for cooking, drinking, and the occasional symbolic face splash. You set the jug on the wooden counter, trying not to look directly at the spider in the corner. Water attracts bugs, and bugs attract frogs, and frogs attract cats, and cats, well, they just knock things over. You sigh. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. And here's a last quirky fact. In some remote hamlets, villagers believed singing while carrying water would lighten the load. Not in a metaphorical way. They genuinely thought the jug would feel lighter if you harmonized with it. So, go ahead, sing. No one's judging, except maybe the cat. The rain finally come, not the pleasant curtain of drizzle type. No, this is full-blown sideways sheet. Did the sky split open rain? You run outside with your arms stretched wide, mouth open, tongue out like a fool, because you know what this means. Time to collect. Barrels are dragged out from sheds. Tubs that haven't seen daylight in months are flipped upright. Wooden buckets, cracked copper pots, even the old helmet from that one cousin who swore he was a knight, they all get pressed into service. This isn't just weather. It's inventory management. Rainwater was a lifeline, and in many towns, it was the only reasonably safe source of fresh water during dry seasons. The key was catching it before it touched the ground, because once it did, it wasn't just water anymore. It was medieval soup, a broth of manure flecks, pigeon droppings, and mystery slime. So, households fashioned elaborate catchment systems. Some installed wooden gutters that directed roof runoff into barrels. Others leaned broad boards at angles to act like makeshift slides. Roofs of thatch were less efficient, but tiled or shingled roofs, chef's kiss. Mainstream records from urban areas like 13th century Paris show laws requiring new houses to include cisterns or rain barrels. And city inspectors, yes, they had those, would find households whose barrels overflowed into the street, because nobody likes surprise foot puddles of mystery origin. But here's a curious tidbit. In some rural villages, rainwater barrels were guarded like treasure, not just from thieves, but from nosy neighbors who might try to borrow a cup that turned into 3 jugs. One Welsh woman supposedly installed a wooden lock on her barrel and threatened to curse any hand that touched it uninvited. Her cat watched approvingly. Inside the house, you hear the soft drumming of rain on the roof. It's one of the few comforting sounds in a world full of creaky carts and coughing neighbors. You light a small oil lamp and check your jars half full already. You exhale. Some towns developed communal rain catchments built into the ground with stone-lined walls and sloped inlets. These cisterns could hold enough water for an entire season, assuming rats' moss and general chaos didn't ruin them first. Historians still argue whether households filtered rainwater consistently. Some texts mention linen cloth straining. Others describe the use of charcoal layers or even bits of ash from the hearth to settle the spirits. The spirits probably didn't settle, but at least the ash added flavor. You watch the rain, slow, each drop, now, spaced with enough silence in between to make you listen harder. The barrels outside are nearly full. The biggest one is even starting to overflow, so you dash out again, barefoot, grabbing the wooden ladle and sipping right from the edge. It tastes not terrible, slightly smoky, with a hint of bark. Back inside, you start boiling a small pot. Boiled water is the safest, even if your hearth fire now smells like wet dog and resin. And for those feeling fancy, there's a secret trick adding mint leaves. Not for sanitation, just because it makes the taste less old bucket and more ambitious medieval spa. And speaking of flair, in some noble households, rainwater wasn't just practical, it was prestige. The manor's main courtyard often had an artfully disguised rain cistern beneath a lion-shaped fountain. The water flowed from its mouth, and children dared each other to drink from the beast's teeth. You glance out the window. The clouds are breaking. Birds start to sing cautiously. Somewhere in the distance, someone's yelling about a missing pot probably claimed by the wind. You smile. Your barrels are full. You're rich, liquid rich. You're standing now at the edge of the manor grounds, the rich side of the water equation. This isn't a muddy village footpath anymore. This is gravel. Actual gravel, imported and deliberately spread. And there, nestled among rose bushes and ornamental hedges, is a fountain in the shape of a lion vomiting water into a carved basin. You try not to stare too long. In medieval cities and noble estates, fountains weren't just decorative, they were declarations. Look at me, they said. My water comes out of marble fish heads. These weren't connected to magic springs. Of course, they were the result of carefully channeled aqueducts, cisterns, and expensive pipework often built by engineers who were paid more than most knights. Historians still debate whether these systems were more functional or just showy. Many fountains were indeed usable, designed to serve multiple households. But in elite homes, they often stood more for status than thirst. You can't exactly sip daintily while a cherub spews water over your shoulder. Inside castles, the kitchens had their own fountains, small, discreet, often just a copper spout protruding from the wall, but crucially always flowing. These systems relied on gravity-fed pipes from elevated cisterns, usually fed by rooftop rain catchments or distant springs. Maintenance was a constant battle. Rats loved the pipes. So did limescale. So did bored scullery boys with knives. A common myth still repeated in taverns is that nobles bathed in rose water. That's only half true. They bathed in water with roses in it, usually because the water itself smelled like old laundry and cabbage. The roses were working overtime. Quirky detail for your imagination. One Mediterranean noble reportedly commissioned a fountain shaped like a unicorn whose horn spouted chilled spring water flavored with fennel. Visitors were required to toast to the unicorn before drinking. It was considered rude otherwise. Back in your village, the closest thing to a fountain is a bucket nailed under a leak in the chapel roof. But here, on noble turf water, Babel's musically polished pebbles gleam, and everything smells faintly of thyme. You edge closer and dip a finger. Cold. So cold, it makes your teeth ache just thinking about drinking it. A servant notices you and glares, not angrily, just with that subtle, aristocratic expression that says no peasants in the splash zone. Some city squares had public fountains funded by guilds or local lords, often carved with their crests. These served hundreds, even thousands of townspeople daily. But queues were long, fights were common, and the water wasn't always trustworthy. People gossiped about fountains. That one's piped from the East Hill full of frogs. This one, too much iron, tastes like armor. Historians note that some urban fountains dispensed beer or wine during festivals. Temporary, of course, but imagine a lion spouting ale. You'd drink too much out of sheer confusion. You step away from the noble fountain, brushing imaginary dust from your tunic. The garden is quiet except for the gentle trickle of engineered elegance. Somewhere nearby, someone is preparing dinner. You can smell roasting turnips and something fishy, perhaps salted eel. The rich eat strangely. A bird dips into the lion's mouth and flutters out again. Even the animals here have better hydration options. As you head back toward your side of the wall, yes, there's a literal wall, you can't help but sigh. Tomorrow, it's back to the spring and the jug and the hope that nobody else got there first. But tonight, you'll remember the unicorn fountain and the way the lion's water was cold enough to make you dream of snow. You follow the main road out of the village, kicking a pebble as you go. Somewhere, up ahead, a river winds lazily through the valley. It glistens in the sun, a silver ribbon threading through fields and forest. And for just a moment, you think, surely that's where I should get my water. Then the wind shifts and you smell it. The river in the medieval world is both blessing and biohazard. It provides fish transportation and scenic views. It also provides a swirling cocktail of everything that shouldn't be in water. Slaughterhouse runoff tannery chemicals, human waste, dead animals, the occasional shoe, and at least one storybook villain's laundry. You reach the banks and watch the current rush past. A dog drinks, a child splashes, a tanner downstream dunks a sheep carcass. Somewhere upstream, someone else is answering nature's call. Still thirsty, medieval towns often developed in proximity to rivers for practical reasons. But those same rivers became the dumping grounds for daily life. Without any concept of wastewater treatment, every street eventually sloped toward the stream. Whatever you didn't want anymore, ashes, bones, used linens, spoiled beer ended up there. It's nature's compost pile, but with more pathogens. Historians still argue whether river use was dictated more by convenience or ignorance. Some households boiled river water religiously. Others filtered it through sand or charcoal. Most, though, they just hoped. And let's not forget the public latrines. In London and Paris, entire blocks built over riverbanks had long drops that emptied directly into the water. It was called living with the flow, or possibly biohazard chic, a mainstream fact to ruin your next picnic in the 14th century. The Thames ran black near London's Butcher Quarter. Travelers often describe the scent as a gut punch wrapped in onions. And yet people still fetched water. Because what else was there? You crouch at the edge, swirling a stick in the murk. It's not all bad. Frogs sing, reeds sway. A heron glares at you like it owns the place. And just downstream, a man bathes, scrubbing his arms with sand, humming to himself blissfully, unaware he's also exfoliating in other people's dishwater. Curious tidbit: some towns hired river wardens not to clean the river, but to fine people for polluting it. A noble idea, undermined slightly by the fact that nobody listened. The fine for dumping pig entrails was 1 penny. The cost of not dumping them, rotting pig entrails. You move on upstream, where the current is faster and the stench less aggressive. A few locals believe the water cleanses itself after a mile. There's no science to back this up. But hey, hope is the medieval filtration system. Eventually, you fill a small jar and boil it over your hearth. The taste is metallic, faintly mossy, with undertones of last week's rainstorm. You pretend it's fine, and sometimes it is. After all, you're still here. The pot bubbles quietly over your hearth steam, curling upward in a lazy spiral. You stir it once, mostly out of habit. The water inside, fetched earlier from the river and boiled within an inch of its molecular patience, still tastes questionable. But at least now, it's warm and unlikely to kill you immediately. In the medieval world, purifying water wasn't exactly a daily ritual. Most people didn't think of water as needing purification. If it looked clear and didn't smell like old boots, it was probably fine. Probably. That or the saints would handle it. You sip carefully, still a bit grassy, still better than dysentery. Historians still argue whether most medieval households knew boiling killed pathogens. It's unlikely they understood germs, but they did notice that boiled water, and beer for that matter, didn't cause as many stomach rebellions. So they boiled when they could, if they had the fuel, the pots, and the patience. But here's the catch: firewood is expensive. Charcoal even more so. And you're already using your fire for cooking, heating, and occasionally convincing a damp tunic to dry. Boiling drinking water. That's a luxury few could maintain consistently. So many simply prayed. It sounds absurd to modern ears, but spiritual water blessing was a genuine medieval practice. People murmured charms over wells. They dipped rosemary sprigs and made the sign of the cross before sipping. One Italian folktale claimed that whispering the Lord's Prayer backward into a cup could drive out the river worm. No, we don't know what the river worm is. We're afraid to ask. A quirky fact from France. In some parishes, the priest would walk a procession to the town's water source on holy days, sprinkling salt and reading verses. The idea was to cleanse both water and community in one go. Unfortunately, the local goats didn't care and continued to use the area as a casual restroom. Filtering was another half solution. Some households strained water through cloth, sometimes linen, sometimes just whatever was handy. A bit of moss or charcoal might be added not for science, but because grandmother did it that way, and grandmother lived to the impressive age of 39, so who's arguing? Of course, you can't filter out smell. That's where flavorings come in. Herbs like mint thyme and even marjoram were steeped into water, not just for taste, but also as mild antiseptics. If your cup of water smells like a salad, that's probably a good sign. And then there's silver. Wealthier folks occasionally tossed a silver coin into their cisterns, believing it kept the water pure. There's actually some antibacterial truth to that. But whether the water was truly safer or just shimmered nicely in candlelight is anyone's guess. You add a mint leaf to your pot. It bobs gently, a little green island in a steaming pond. It won't make the water holy, but it might make it drinkable. Then again, your neighbor Gertrude doesn't boil at all. She says it weakens the spirit. Her household drinks straight from the pond, sprinkles a bit of ash for luck, and claims they never get sick. You note that Gertrude also believes her cat speaks Latin. A child walks by your door with a ladle and a hopeful expression. You pour them a cup and watch them gulp it down. They smile. Tastes better than last week, they say. You nod solemnly as if you did something more than add mint and boil it thrice. The fire crackles. Outside, the sun dips low, casting your doorway in amber. For now, your water is clean, warm, and you think just maybe a little magical. You pull a wooden mug from the shelf, inspect it for spiders, just the one today, and pour yourself a generous helping of the village's most reliable hydration option, weak beer. It fizzes, faintly smells of warm bread and wet socks, and has all the alcoholic punch of a sleepy hedgehog. But you sip gratefully because it's safe. And in a world where the water can betray you faster than your gossiping neighbor, beer is a friend. Medieval beer, specifically small beer or small ale, was more beverage than buzz. Brewed quickly, low in alcohol, and consumed by nearly everyone, it was essentially the Gatorade of its time. Farmers drank it. Monks drank it. Children drank it. The cat probably drank it once, regretted it, and went back to licking puddles. Historians agree, for vast swaths of Europe, beer wasn't about getting drunk. It was about not getting dysentery. The brewing process, boiling, fermenting, filtering, killed off many of the nasties that lurked in untreated water. The result: a murky, yeasty drink that filled your belly and didn't murder your insides. In the average household, brewing was a weekly event. You'd soak barley or oats, boil the mix with herbs, hops if you had them, whatever grew in your garden if you didn't, and ferment it in clay or wooden casks. It didn't last long, just a few days, before turning sour, but neither did most things back then. Quirky tidbit: in some German towns, brewers added bread crusts, honey, or even tree bark for flavor. One eccentric monk reportedly insisted on singing psalms directly into the brew to bless it. Nobody wanted to drink his ale, but they didn't say it to his face. Beer also serves social functions. Households with a decent brew often shared with neighbors. Alewives, women who brewed and sold beer, became fixtures in every village. They'd hang a broomstick or a leafy branch outside their doors when a new batch was ready. The medieval version of a neon open sign. But ale wasn't universally adored. There were skeptics. Some clergy warned that beer dulled the senses and led to excessive flatulence. One French bishop declared, "He who drinks beer at dawn cannot hear angels sing." To which the locals replied, "Probably, we can't hear them anyway, Your Grace." Historians still argue whether small beer genuinely improved public health or just replaced one set of problems with another. It was safer than water, yes, but also addictive, calorie heavy, and prone to spoiling. plus a few unlucky batches fermented too far and packed more of a punch than expected. You drink 3 mugs, thinking you're hydrating, and suddenly you're trying to arm wrestle a goat. Still, for your average peasant, beer was daily life. You woke up to beer, worked with beer, and sometimes even bathed babies. In beer, thin, diluted, slightly foamy, and frankly better than well water. You take another sip. It's lukewarm, slightly sour. There's a twig in it. You remove the twig. Sip again. Still counts as hydration. And here's the thing. After a while, you start to like it. Not for the flavor, which ranges from wet toast to barnyard breakfast, but for the ritual, the comfort, the quiet certainty that at least today your beverage won't bite back. You set the mug down, wipe your mouth with your sleeve, and listen to the hum of evening settling outside. Somewhere nearby, a child laughs, a donkey brays, someone sneezes dramatically. You smile. Beer may not be glamorous, but it's safe. And in a world full of surprises, that's something to toast. You walk with purpose across a parched field jug in hand, and a peculiar companion at your side, an elderly man with a forked hazel twig. He mutters to himself, eyes half closed, arms outstretched, as if conducting a silent orchestra of underground streams. Meet your local dowser. In the medieval world, if you didn't know where to dig a well, or you were too scared of digging into something angry, you hired someone who claimed to feel water. Dowsers, also called water witches, used wooden rods, Y-shaped twigs, or even pendulums to sense hidden veins of groundwater. It was more art than science, or more theater than art, or maybe just sweaty optimism. The old man's stick quivers in his hands. Here he whispers, stabbing the earth with a toe. Dig here, and water shall sing. You nod solemnly. Mostly because he's the only one who's found water twice this year. Historians still argue whether dowsing worked or was simply coincidence. Modern science scoffs, of course, but when you're bone dry and desperate, you'll follow anyone who squints meaningfully at a tree root. And if nothing else, dowsers were entertaining. One reportedly claimed he could smell water. Another claimed the twig stung his fingers when he walked over wet soil. Meanwhile, professional well diggers, actual tradesmen, relied more on terrain clues. They looked for areas where plants grew unusually green, or where fog lingered longer in early morning. These clues often indicated groundwater close to the surface. And if all else failed, they just started digging and hoped they didn't hit a pocket of sulfurous mud. A successful well digger was a local hero. People gave them bread, beer, and more than a few hopeful glances. A failed well digger. That poor soul got muttered about in church. Remember last spring's miracle trench, someone would whisper. Still dry. And now, it's full of frogs. Fringe detail, some well-digging rituals involve burying offerings at the site coins, bred chicken bones, or even clippings of the dowser's hair. Not because it helped, but because tradition said you must feed the earth. The earth rarely left a thank you note. You crouch by a half-built well near the village edge. It's barely waist deep, lined with stones and bone dry. The latest attempt. There's a pile of spoons nearby. Apparently, someone thought metal vibrations might help. In wealthier towns, well construction became a serious affair. Engineers were hired, contracts drawn up, and pulley systems installed. Some had stone steps spiraling downward, so the water could be fetched even when the surface dropped. The deeper the well, the cooler the water, and the greater the risk of collapse. Many diggers prayed more than they shoveled. Quirky fact, in parts of Scandinavia, it was said that water spirits could steal a well's flow if offended. If a new well dried mysteriously, the only solution was to apologize loudly at midnight and pour in a pint of ale. Imagine explaining that to your livestock. The dowser beside you frowns. "No singing yet," he murmurs, pacing a few more steps. His twig twitches violently. He gasps. "There." You smile. Is it real? Who knows? But you mark the spot, just in case. Sometimes, belief is half the battle, especially when the other half involves mud and rope. You shuffle into the town square with your empty jug just as the bell tolls noon and the livestock begin to complain. Goats bleat, pigs grunt, and cows low with the kind of long, suffering sighs that say, "Yes, we too need water." It's allocation day. In many medieval towns, water wasn't just a human necessity, it was a four-legged priority list. Livestock kept people alive. So when fresh water was scarce, guess who got it first? That's right, Bessie the cow, Duchess the goat, and Sir Clux-a-lot the surprisingly aggressive rooster. You eye the communal trough. It's freshly filled, clear, rippling, and just taunting enough to make your throat feel like sandpaper. But it's roped off. Animals only says the sign, not that you can read it. The pig understands, though. He's already trotted up and dunked his snout like he owns the place. Historians point out that livestock access to water was often better regulated than people's. Large towns employed water wardens or trough keepers who ensured the animals got their fill at specific hours. Humans came afterward, or not at all, depending on the day's priorities. This isn't as cruel as it sounds. A dehydrated cow doesn't give milk. A thirsty ox plows crooked furrows. And a dry duck is just a weird bird. Wealthier homes had separate animal troughs, low stone-lined basins set in shady spots. These were filled with barrel-carried water, sometimes flavored with a pinch of salt or grain husks to encourage drinking. You wouldn't dare sip from them yourself, not because of germs who knew those existed, but because of the social shame. Drinking from the ox trough became shorthand for desperation. A quirky tidbit: in some villages, people trained dogs to haul small carts of water from the spring to the barnyard. These water dogs wore tiny harnesses and got scraps as tips. One particularly famous hound in Flanders reportedly learned to ring a bell when the bucket was empty. You watch a boy carry a wooden ladle, scooping from the pig's secondary bucket. He drinks quickly before anyone sees. You nod, pretending not to notice. You've done the same. Meanwhile, your own bucket waits. The well has a queue. People shuffle forward slowly, each eyeing the animals as they slurp luxuriously. One man mutters, "Wish I were a cow." Another replies, "Cows don't pay taxes." Fair point. Historians still argue whether these animal-first policies were practical necessity or subtle class statements. In places where the nobility bred horses worth more than peasants, it's clear where priorities lay. One estate manual recommends watering stallions thrice daily, even in drought, while peasants boiled moss tea. In the distance, someone pours out stale beer into a chicken's dish. The bird tilts its head, pecks once, and decides it prefers puddles. You sigh. Eventually, it's your turn at the well. The rope creaks, the bucket splashes. You fill your jug slowly, watching droplets bead on the rim. You sip, warm metallic, but undeniably wet. You glance back at the cow trough. Bessie meets your gaze with calm satisfaction. You raise your jug in salute. You stand atop the battlements, eyes scanning the horizon. The enemy is out there silent for now, but waiting. Inside the castle, everything is tense, quiet, and thirsty. Siege. You never realize how loud a lack of water can be until it echoes off stone walls. Every bucket becomes sacred. Every drip, a sound louder than footsteps. You've rationed your personal flask to 2 mouthfuls a day, and even that feels extravagant. In a medieval siege, water was the true weapon. Armies could be patient, walls could hold. But if the well ran dry, the siege was won before the first stone was thrown. Smart castle builders planned ahead. Many castles had secret wells dug deep within their keep, sometimes as much as 300 feet, lined with smooth stones to deter contamination. Others had rain cisterns beneath the kitchens or courtyard grates that channeled runoff into cleverly disguised underground tanks. If you had one of those, you might last a month, maybe more. If the rats didn't get it first. You peek through a murder hole. Below, the attackers are lounging, passing a jug around, and clearly not rationing. You try not to think about that. Historians still argue whether sieges were lost more often to dehydration than starvation. The records are unclear, but the patterns speak volumes. Towns with long-lasting water sources held out for months. Those without collapse within days, often with no battle, just surrender. And then there were the water smuggling operations. Brave souls sneaking out at night to reach streams or hidden springs. Stories abound of disguised monks ferrying in water under barrels of fish, or children crawling through tunnels with goat skins full of rain. Not always successful. One Welsh lad reportedly smuggled water in his shoes, soaked, smelly, but heroic. You descend into the castle kitchen, where a single cauldron of water is being watched like it contains royal jewels. A maid adds a pinch of herbs, mostly for morale. The cook eyes the level mutters and replaces the lid like it's a spell book. Quirky fact, during the siege of Chateau Gaillard, it's said the defenders collected dew each morning with linen sheets. They wrung them out into buckets, sip by precious sip. Tedious, yes, but creative and slightly poetic. In desperation, some turned to snow or ice if they had it. But melting snow indoors without blackening every pot required patience and a cold season. Many castles just didn't have that luxury. Others tried fruit juice beer or broth made with questionable water. You try not to think about what made it questionable. One castle legend says ran its fountain for days just to convince attackers they weren't thirsty. They were, but the bluff worked until it didn't. Outside, you hear a catapult creak. Inside, a child coughs dryly. You tighten your grip on your jug. You know there's a secret spring somewhere under the east tower. The old steward mentioned it once between sips of honeyed wine. You just hope it's real. Hope at this point is almost as valuable as the water itself. You set your flask down, check the lid, and say a quick prayer. Tomorrow might be the day the cistern goes dry, but not tonight. You push open the heavy wooden door, and a puff of warm, humid air envelops you like a damp woolen cloak. Welcome to the public bathhouse, a place of steam, bare feet, questionable hygiene, and surprisingly complicated plumbing. In larger medieval towns, bathhouses were more than places to wash. They were social hubs, gossip centers, and budget spas. You'd pay a small fee, disrobe behind a linen curtain if you were lucky, and wade into communal pools with water that had been heated, stirred, and shared by half the neighborhood. The plumbing. Surprisingly advanced, some bathhouses had clay or lead pipes directing water from nearby springs or cisterns. Others used wooden channels gutters with ambition that snaked across rooftops and down walls, pouring into cisterns where the water could be heated by a fire-stoked boiler. Once warmed water flowed into tubs through a series of carved stone basins. Hot water on one side, cool water on the other, and in between, a lukewarm mixture fondly referred to as tepid but tolerable. It was all gravity-fed, unless you had a particularly eager apprentice willing to haul buckets. Historians still argue whether bathhouses were cleaner than just staying home. On one hand, flowing water herbal rinses and scrub brushes sound promising. On the other hand, so many feet, so many strangers, so much back hair. And yet people came, because the bathhouse offered more than cleanliness. It offered water, abundant, hot, and flowing. You could soak steam sip, though maybe not from the tub, and spend hours chatting, shaving, or just sweating out last week's bad decisions. A quirky tidbit: in some German cities, bathhouses offered a bath and a broth combo. You'd soak in a tub and then enjoy a hearty stew served in a separate room, thankfully. In Paris, one bathhouse even claimed its steam could cure melancholy. Bold, steamy claims. You settle into the corner of a stone tub. The water is pleasantly warm, with a faint scent of thyme and cabbage. You hear a woman across the pool discussing the neighbor's goat with scandalous specificity. Someone splashes. A child squeals. The bathkeeper glares and swats at an errant duck that somehow wandered inside. It's oddly peaceful. In noble homes, private baths existed too, usually in the form of large wooden barrels or copper tubs placed near the fire. Servants filled them by hand, one bucket at a time. The water cooled quickly, but a short soak was better than nothing. And if you were really wealthy, built-in heating stones, velvet robes, and rose petals, very Instagrammable. If Instagram had been carved into wood, you glance at the plumbing, little more than sloped channels and wooden plugs. But it works, mostly. The water flows. The drain doesn't clog often, and the bathhouse smells only mildly of old socks. You close your eyes, let the warmth soak into your bones. In a world of cold, wells, dry springs, and dodgy dowsers, this is luxury. Even if the duck's staring at you, you wake before dawn, rubbing sleep from your eyes, with fingers that smell faintly of thyme and boiled cabbage. Yesterday's bathhouse adventure lingers pleasant in memory, but less so in your sheets, which absorbed more bath water than you did. It's laundry day, or, as it's more commonly known in medieval circles, washing, whining, and worrying about water. In a world where clean water is precious, and soap is made of leftover fat, and ashes, washing anything, your tunic, your hands, your soul, is a risk. Cleanliness might be next to godliness, but in the Middle Ages, it also came dangerously close to a fever. You drag your laundry to the communal washing area, which is less facility and more flat rock near a trickling stream. Others are already there, slapping tunics against stones, murmuring prayers, and trying not to splash too enthusiastically. Because splashback here isn't just rude, it's contagious. Historians point out that while medieval people weren't perpetually filthy, they didn't wash as often as modern hygiene might recommend. Not due to laziness, but because washing, especially with water of uncertain origin, could make things worse, and often did. Remember that nice river from earlier, the one downstream from the tannery, the slaughterhouse, and the pig parade. That's where you're rinsing your underclothes now. Enjoy. Some people boiled their wash water first. Others steeped herbs like lavender mint or marjoram in it. Not to kill bacteria, they didn't know about bacteria, but to chase away smells and evil spirits. If it smells like flowers, maybe the plague won't notice, they reasoned. Fringe belief in parts of Eastern Europe, it was thought that washing during a new moon could weaken your joints. Laundry was scheduled accordingly, with some villages posting safe wash days on the chapel door. You dunk your linen shirt and scrub it against a smooth stone. The water is cold, the soap gritty, the air full of gossip. Someone is arguing about goats again. Someone else is humming an off-key hymn. A dog sneezes into someone's petticoat. You rinse your shirt once, twice, a third time. The water runs gray each time. You try not to imagine what part of town that gray came from. Quirky tidbit, some towns hosted semi-annual mass wash days where entire neighborhoods gathered to clean every cloth they owned. It became a festival of sorts, music, food, even jugglers. One festival featured a washing contest, with the prize being a bar of imported soap and a kiss from the mayor's goat. You wring out your shirt and hang it on a low branch. It will dry in a few hours if the birds behave and the goats stay disinterested. Washing yourself is no easier. Personal bathing was a balancing act too little, and you reeked too much, and you risked chills, open pores, or so they thought, melancholic seepage. So you compromise, splash your face, rinse your hands, maybe soak your feet on saints' days. Some believed washing too often stripped away your body's natural defenses. The skin drinks the air, said one monk. Let it drink dirty. He lived to 42, possibly out of spite. You finish your wash and gather your things. Grateful the sun is out. Water might be a threat, but drying is your friend. You glance once more at the stream, now clouded with soap suds and secrets. You whisper a soft apology to the water and head home, arms full of damp, slightly cleaner fabric. You hitch your pack higher on your shoulders and squint down the winding road ahead. It's rutted, sun-bleached, and suspiciously devoid of any bubbling brooks or roadside fountains. Welcome to the traveling life, a grand, dust-covered game of will this cup kill me. As a medieval pilgrim or merchant, hydration is both crucial and hazardous. You need water to keep moving, thinking, not dying. But where you find that water and what's floating in it determines whether your journey ends at Canterbury or in a field with dramatic stomach noises and sudden existential regret. Most travelers carried water in wineskins or wooden flasks. The trick was keeping it from spoiling. Leather wineskins, while portable, could go rancid quickly in the sun. Wooden flasks leaked. Clay jugs shattered. One clever merchant in Aragon reportedly used a hollowed gourd lined with beeswax, innovative if slightly fragrant. You stop at a wayside shrine, hoping there's a spring nearby. No luck. Just a dusty statue of Saint Ulrich and a basket of wilted herbs. Someone's left an offering, half a turnip, and a dried fig. You mutter a prayer for hydration and move on. Historians still argue whether most medieval travelers truly understood water safety or simply relied on trial error and invincible optimism. Many drank from streams' wells or puddles without question. Some preferred weak beer or watered wine, believing it safer, and they were often right. A quirky tidbit: in certain parts of Italy, pilgrims were given a hydration blessing before setting off. The priest would sprinkle their flask with holy water, supposedly ensuring divine filtration. According to one tale, a blessed flask once refilled itself. According to reality, it was probably just topped off by a helpful nun. You pass a fellow traveler. His lips are cracked, his flask empty. He asks if you've seen a well. You offer him a sip of your own lukewarm, slightly mossy, but not fatal. He nods gratefully and offers a walnut in return. You accept. Nuts don't require boiling. Further along, you spot a small inn. It boasts a sign: fresh ale and friendly beds. You ask for water. The innkeeper raises an eyebrow and offers weak cider instead. You nod. It's fizzy tart, and probably contains fewer amoebas than the puddle out front. Traveling clergy sometimes carried purification kits, charcoal linen filters, even bits of silver. Knights carried confidence and large bladders. Peasants, they carried hope and strong stomachs. One French trader famously invented a travel filter made of straw stuffed with herbs. He sipped through it like a reed. It didn't work, but he insisted it added a rustic flavor. He died of dysentery, but stylishly. As you bed down under a tree that night, stars peeking between branches, you sip the last of your flask and sigh. It's not refreshing, it's not crisp, but it hasn't betrayed you yet. You whisper a thank you to St. Ulrich and to beeswax gourds and to every silent stream that didn't contain a surprise frog. Then you sleep parched but grateful. You wake to the sound of dew, soft rhythmic drips slipping from leaf to leaf above your head. It's morning and everything glistens. Your breath is a pale mist. The world feels cool, damp, and for once generously wet. In this moment, you think about how water has shaped every step of your day, your village, your entire medieval existence. It's the silent force behind hunger, health worship, and even war. Without it, crops die, bread crumbles, and beer turns sour. With it, clean, abundant flowing, you just might thrive. You make your way home. The jug on your hip is half full from a blessed puddle near the shrine. You'll boil it, just in case. Maybe add mint, maybe not. Your feet squish slightly in damp boots, but it's a good squish, a hopeful squish. In the village, the well creaks to life. A bucket comes up full. You smile. Today, the rope gods are kind. At the market, someone is selling small bottles of holy water from a spring 10 miles off. It's probably just stream runoff, but the label includes a saint's name and a badly drawn fish, so who's to argue? Historians still argue whether people in the Middle Ages truly lived in fear of thirst. But But it's clear they lived with water always on their minds. It wasn't just something to drink, it was something to chase, to revere, to fear. It leaked into language, superstition, and law. It trickled through the rhythms of rural life, soaking into every custom, every complaint. A quirky parting image. One manuscript from the 13th century describes a man who dreamed of a never-ending well, surrounded by singing frogs and dancing children. He spent his days digging in different spots around the village, sure he'd find it. He never did. But he did become the village's most prolific ditch digger and a minor local saint of sorts. As you settle by the hearth that night, a fresh jug beside you, and steam curling from your tea, you reflect on the quiet drama of hydration. No battles, no crowns, just bucket springs and a desperate hope for rain. You lift the mug to your lips. It's warm, slightly earthy, and perfect. You don't need a feast. You don't need fanfare. Just a clean sip. And so as the embers fade and the evening hush deepens, you let your shoulders sink and your breath slow. The worries of water fetching, of dry days and empty jugs drift away like steam rising from a hot cup. You are still. Your world is quiet. The spring still bubbles somewhere in the dark. Outside the night, creatures hum softly. A breeze rustles the thatch. Perhaps tomorrow will bring rain. Perhaps not. But tonight, you are warm. You are full. You are home. Sleep comes not like thunder, but like mist, gentle curling around your thoughts, lulling you into the soft earth of dreams. Let the buckets rest. Let the rivers wind. Let the wells keep their secrets a little longer. You've earned your rest.